All right. Let's dive into this AI Act from the EU. It seems like every day there's some new headline about AI. And the EU, well, they're not exactly known for dragging their feet when it comes to regulation, right?
It's true. The EU is definitely trying to get ahead of the game with this one. They see AI evolving at an incredible pace, and I think they want to make sure that there are some ground rules in place.
So we're talking about, those really powerful AI systems that seem to be able to do it all these days.
Yeah, exactly like Chat GPT. That's a prime example. The EU AI Act actually has a specific focus on what they call general purpose AI models, and that's a really important distinction.
Okay, so general purpose AI models. What makes them so special that they need their own chapter in the AI rulebook?
Well, it's all about their versatility. These models are trained on massive data sets, which means they can be used for a huge range of tasks. But, and this is the tricky part, the risk of these models isn't really about the model itself, but how it's used.
I see. So it's kind of like giving someone a toolbox full of incredibly powerful tools. They can build an amazing house or accidentally knock down a supporting wall. It all comes down to how they use those tools.
That's a great analogy, and I think the EU wants to make sure no one accidentally knocks down the whole neighborhood. So the Act actually categorizes AI systems based on, their risk level.
Okay, so high risk AI, low risk AI. How does that work?
Well, at the very top, you have AI systems that are just completely prohibited, things that are considered too dangerous, like AI designed to manipulate people's emotions.
Okay, that makes sense.
Then you have high-risk AI, which includes things like AI used in healthcare or finance, self-driving cars. These are allowed, but with very, very strict rules.
Right, because the stakes are so much higher if something goes wrong.
Exactly. And then at the bottom, you have the low-risk AI, which is what most of us encounter every day, like spam filters or those recommendation algorithms.
Makes sense. So where do these general purpose AI models fit into all of this?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. The EU actually added a whole new chapter to the Act specifically for these general purpose AI models, almost like they were writing the rule book as the game was changing right in front of them.
It's like trying to hit a moving target.
Exactly. And one of the key things they do in the Act is make a very clear distinction between an AI model and an AI system.
Okay, I'll be honest. I'm a little fuzzy on the difference there. What's the distinction?
Yeah, it's subtle, but it's important. Think of it this way. The AI model is like the engine of a car, right? It's the core technology that's been trained to perform a specific task, like recognizing images or, translating languages.
Right.
The AI system, on the other hand, is the entire car, the engine, the wheels, the steering wheel, everything. It's how that AI model is actually put into practice.
So the AI model is like the brains, and the AI system is the body. It's how those brains are actually used in the real world.
You got it. And when it comes to these general purpose AI models, the AI system is super important because it determines how that powerful technology is actually being used.
And that brings us to something the article calls systemic risk, which sounds a little ominous.
It's definitely something to take seriously.
So what is systemic risk in the context of AI? What are we talking about here?
Essentially, it's the potential for widespread harm because of how interconnected these general purpose AI models are becoming.
Interconnected how?
Well, imagine a scenario where, let's say, a faulty AI model used by major banks to assess creditworthiness suddenly denies loans to millions of people.
Oh, wow. We're talking about a financial meltdown, all because of an AI glitch.
Exactly. And that's just one example.
So what can be done? I mean, with all these potential risks,
Hmm.
what's the EU doing to make sure these general purpose AI models don't go rogue?
Well, that's where the AI Act really comes into play. They've laid out a whole bunch of obligations for providers of these models, regardless of whether or not their model is considered to pose a systemic risk.
So even if you're developing a general purpose AI model that's not designed to, take over the world, you still have to play by the EU's rules.
Precisely. And these rules are outlined in Articles 53 and 54 of the AI Act.
All right, let's break those articles down. What are
Yeah.
some of the key obligations for these general purpose AI providers?
Sure. So one of the big ones is transparency providers have to create and keep this really detailed documentation about their AI models. Like, we're talking about everything from the data it was trained on to how it's designed, how it's supposed to work, any potential risks, the whole 9 yards. And it
Wow.
can't just be hidden away somewhere in their system. It has to be easy to find and understand for anyone using the model or, integrating it into their own systems.
So it's like a big, here's everything you need to know about this AI manual.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about making sure everyone in that AI supply chain knows what they're dealing with so they can make smart decisions.
That makes a lot of sense. What else is in this AI rulebook? Anything else we should know about?
Let's see, copyright compliance is a big one. The EU is really cracking down on making sure these AI models aren't infringing on intellectual property rights.
Which I imagine gets kind of tricky when you're talking about these models being trained on, what is it, massive amounts of data?
Yeah, it definitely gets complicated. Think about it. A lot of these models are trained on huge data sets of text code, even art. So the EU wants to make sure all of that is being used legally.
So no training your new AI model on the entire Harry Potter series without getting permission from J.K. Rowling.
Exactly. Providers need to be able to prove they're following copyright laws and even have a system in place if someone makes a copyright claim against their model.
Wow. They really thought of everything. Okay, so that's for all general purpose AI models. But what about the ones that are considered high risk, the ones with the potential for that systemic risk we talked about earlier? Do the rules get even stricter?
You bet they do. That's where Article 55 comes in, and things get a whole lot more serious for those high-risk models.
Okay, Article 55 time for the EU to lay down the law. What are we talking about here?
Basically, a whole other level of scrutiny. These high-risk models, they have to go through really intense testing to make sure they're safe, including something called adversarial testing.
Adversarial testing, it sounds intense. What is that exactly?
Yeah. So it's kind of like ethical hacking, but for AI, they basically try to find the model's weaknesses, see how it reacts if you feed it unexpected inputs or try to manipulate it.
So they're trying to break it.
Well, not exactly break it, but the goal is to find any vulnerabilities, see if they can make it crack under pressure, and then develop safeguards before the model is released.
That's going to be important, especially for something like, I don't know, healthcare or self-driving cars. You don't want any surprises once those models are out in the real world.
Exactly, and it doesn't stop at testing. Providers of high-risk models, they also have to come up with and implement these really comprehensive risk mitigation plans.
Risk mitigation plans, what do those look like?
Well, basically, they have to think of every possible way their AI model could go wrong. Data breaches, privacy violations, unintended consequences. Even someone using the model for malicious purposes, it all has to be accounted for.
So it's like, what's that thing? Worst case scenario planning, but for AI?
Pretty much. They need to be prepared for anything and everything and have plans in place to either prevent those bad things from happening or at least minimize the damage if they do.
That's a lot of pressure. And speaking of things going wrong, the article mentioned something about reporting, what do they call them? Serious incidents. But honestly, what does a serious incident even look like when you're talking about AI this powerful?
That's a great question, and it's something that even the people creating these rules are still trying to figure out. Trying to define a quote-unquote serious incident in the context of AI, it's not as simple as it sounds.
It's not just about the AI crashing or, malfunctioning.
Right, it's more about the potential consequences of what happens when an AI messes up, whether that's financial harm, damage to someone's reputation, or even physical harm in some cases.
It's a huge responsibility for these AI developers.
It is, but the EU's definitely taking a very cautious approach. You can tell they really get how beneficial AI can be, but also how risky it can be. And with this AI Act, they're trying to walk that tightrope between encouraging innovation and protecting people from potential harm.
So this act, it's not just some vague set of guidelines. There's an actual timeline for all of this to go into effect.
Oh, yeah, there's a deadline. The AI Act has a two-phase approach. New general-purpose AI models, anything coming out after August 2nd, 2025, they have to be compliant with these rules from day one.
So if you're working on the next ChatGPT right now, you better get your act together by August 2025. What about all the AI models that are already out there, though?
So the AI models that were released before August 2025, they get a little more time. They have until August 2027 to make sure they're following all the rules.
Yes, it has some breathing room, but the clock is ticking. And to help everyone navigate all of this, the EU's putting together some extra resources too, right?
Yeah, they know this is a lot to process. They're working on these codes of practice to give more specific guidance on how to actually comply with the AI Act. And they even have a dedicated AI office that's supposed to help with all things AI regulation.
Okay, so they're not just throwing this huge rule book at everyone and walking away.
Okay.
That's good to know.
Exactly. They know this has to be a team effort. Working with AI developers and providers and the people using AI, that's the only way to make sure this technology is being developed and used responsibly.
Well, after talk about all this, the regulations, the deadlines, the potential risks, it's easy to get overwhelmed. So let's bring it back down to earth for a second. What does all of this actually mean for someone like me or anyone listening who's, using or thinking about using AI in their work?
Right. Yeah, it's a lot to think about. On the one hand, you've got these amazing AI tools that can do some really incredible things. But then there's this whole other side of it, figuring out the rules and
Right.
regulations.
It's like, how do you even begin to wrap your head around all of it?
Yeah.
So for those of us who aren't, AI experts, what are some practical things we should be taking away from all this? What do we really need to be thinking about?
Well, for starters, just being aware of the AI Act and what it means for anyone using AI is huge. Even if you're not the one developing these AI models, if you're using them in your work, you need to know what's what.
So do your research. Don't just assume that any AI tool you're using is automatically following the rules.
Exactly. And that actually leads into the second thing, which is transparency. Start asking questions about the AI tools you're using.
Yeah.
Ask your provider about their AI model. Where did it come from? What kind of data was it trained on? How does it even work? The more you know, the better equipped you'll be to use it responsibly.
It's like reading the label before you buy something at the store.
Right.
You want to know what's in it, where it came from, all that good stuff.
Exactly. And if a provider is being cagey about sharing that information, that's probably not a good sign.
Makes sense. Anything else we should be keeping in mind?
This one might seem obvious, but stay informed. Things are changing so fast in the world of AI, and the EU AI Act is really just the tip of the iceberg. New regulations, guidelines, best practices, they're popping up all the time. The IEPP, the group that published the article we've been talking about, they're a great resource for staying up to date on all this stuff.
Oh, yeah. They do some great work. Actually, I get their newsletter, the AI Governance Dashboard. Super insightful.
Here you go. See? Staying ahead of the curve, that's the key.
It definitely feels like we're in uncharted territory here, but it sounds like a little knowledge and awareness can go a long way. Well, as we wrap up our deep dive into the EU AI Act, I'm left with one final question. Is regulation really enough? Can you really put these guardrails on something as powerful and unpredictable as AI, especially with these general purpose models that seem to be evolving at the speed of light?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And honestly,
Yeah.
I don't think anyone has a clear answer. I mean, the EU AI Act is a huge step. It shows they're taking this seriously. They're recognizing that we can't just sit back and watch as AI changes everything. It's all about trying to steer things in the right direction, making sure AI is used for good.
Oh, for sure. And on that note, we'll leave everyone with this final thought. The EU AI Act, it focuses on reducing the risks that come with AI, but it also recognizes how much potential this technology has. As we move further into this age of AI, it's really up to all of us developers, policymakers, even just regular people using AI to make sure it's used to make things better, to solve problems, to create a better future. That's it for today's deep dive. Until next time.